And so I saw this guy and he's like, Adrian, it's time. And I'm like, what do you mean, Pastor? And he's all, it's time, Adrian. I'm like, okay, time for what? And he said, it's time for you to awaken the sleeping giants. And I'm like, what? And he said, and he repeated himself, it's time, Adrian, it's time for you to awaken the sleeping giants. And I'm like, this guy's tripping, right? I was like, Pastor's gone crazy. I'm like, okay, Pastor, whatever. So after I talked to Pastor, I end up going to a bathroom that's in the back of this huge gym, and it's in the shape of this really nice like Indian palace, and it's all like white ivory, and it didn't really fit in the gym, but I knew that it was a bathroom, so I went there. And as I walked into the bathroom, I noticed that there was like a crack on the side of the wall, and I thought it was weird, so I went and I kind of just ran my finger through it, and as soon as I touched it, it started crumbling, and all of a sudden the entire bathroom started to come apart, and pieces started falling all over the place, and I ended up backing up, and as everything's falling, I see that they're becoming like these little liquid pools of silver, and they start to morph and transform into a figure. And I'm like, what the heck? So I'm like freaking out, and I go to the back, and I all of a sudden start to see that the whole palace is forming two giants, and they're made of like this liquid silver material, but at the same time, as they're starting to take shape, they have like really robotic, almost transformer like features. And then all of a sudden they start to like make noises, and they start to destroy things that are around them. So at that point, I'm like running and trying to get away from them. And as I get into the hallway, obviously I have one of these scenes where I'm like going in slow motion and running as fast as I can, but everything's super slow. And then I get outside, and I look back and I see them starting to wreak havoc, and then I wake up. Okay. So that was a dream. And again, like this is what, how many years later? Almost 10, more than 10 years later, and I still remember pretty much all
Yeah,
the details.
super lucid.
Yeah, and this isn't uncommon for me. Like I've always been a really lucid dreamer. I've actually had actual lucid dreams before, and several times I've had dreams that will come true. They're not always maybe exactly the same, but
Wow,
I'll
interesting.
dream out a scenario where like something happens, like I meet somebody, and then in real life it'll kind of happen
Happens
almost,
that way.
very, very similar.
Interesting.
So
That's so wild.
yeah. So that was the dream, and it was obviously so impactful that I've had to do something with it. So it ended up becoming an album that I started working on with one of my close friends. And that was it, right? So I didn't really think much of it. I never really quite understood what it meant. I mean, I was able to break things down here and there because, like I said, there's so much symbology that is really personal to my life, right? Like the hoopah and things like that. And I actually showed it to a few people, and even like when I was going to church at the time, I showed it to somebody, and he apparently that was one of his giftings, was to like interpret dreams. So he gave me a lot of information with that, and um, yeah, I was always really fascinated by it. And
You ever see the pastor again and tell him about it?
no, I never saw him again. He ended up once I left the Bay Area. Yeah, and I never got to tell him about that. But the interesting thing, and the reason I called it Sleeping Giants, was because when I was trying to decide on a name for the company, that was one of the main things that came to mind. And then at that point, I made the realization that the two giants that I awoke, right, were actually the men and women that I was supposed to be helping. Right. So that's kind of what clicked. It's like, oh, that's what that was.
Right.
And it made sense. And I'm sure, like I said, I think that it's one of those dreams where I'll probably be unpacking for the rest of my life because there's so much in it.